Hey guys and welcome. In today's video I wanted to go into more detail around Hazard Zone and the story and a little bit of lore really around the reason why we're collecting these data drives, what they are, why they fall from the sky, and the motives behind Oz, who is the leader of the NOPATs, the US and of course Russia, and to give a little bit more detail around the mode in general, because again we know what we do in the mode but we don't know why we do it. And again, this video is going to be really informative around that. In the description down below I'm going to leave a podcast which was actually released by Battlefield themselves, going into detail, and it goes and explains essentially what the reasoning behind all of this is. And we know the story of the NOPATs. I've done plenty of videos on it on the channel anyway, so if you guys want to keep up to date and get up to date with the story behind Hazard Zone and Battlefield 2042 in general, go back and check out some of the videos we did on the story. And again, it does go into a lot of detail around it. Hope you guys go and enjoy today's video. It's made quite a lot of time to make, so I'd really appreciate it if you guys consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on today's video if you have enjoyed and learned something new. Much appreciated. Comment down below your excitement for Battlefield and let me know if you are struggling to understand anything, and I can try and help you piece the pieces together. But yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into it. So to start with, what it looks like that is going to be happening with this game is, of course, with Hazard Zone, that's where the storyline is going to be predominantly told through Battlefield 2042. But alongside Hazard Zone, there looks also to be a podcast that's going to be released on Spotify, as well as a couple of other places where we can essentially listen to it and get up to date with the story, or if any new things have happened in the world of Battlefield for the storyline on the lore, or Oz, or the US or Russia, or anything like that. That's where we're going to be updated with a new podcast from them. I think they're around 12 minutes long. It could be longer, it could be shorter, but in those podcasts, that's where the key information is going to be told, and a lot of it is going to be summarized and pieced together. So in this case, this is exactly what this first podcast did. It pieced together everything we know so far, so everything from Kayvan Bashir from the Journey of the NOPATs, all the way to Irish and the Exodus story trailer, and again with obviously some of the other bits that we've read around the issues and the wars which have happened from 2040 all the way up until 2042. So again, we're going to go into detail around those today, but again, I'll leave that podcast down in the description down below. You can go listen to it on Spotify, and also you can download the transcript for that as well. So again, you can have a read through it if you really wanted to do that.
ETA to drop capsule re-entry 20 seconds. Please advise visual confirmation. Blue Hawk has landed. Repeat, Blue Hawk has landed. Secure the area. Confirm payload. Approaching the capsule now. Data drive secured. I'm surrounded! Lieutenant, you're breaking up. Can you hear me? They're coming for the gun!
The sounds you're hearing are a leaked transmission obtained through an anonymous source. It's from a battle that erupted in the town of Gorlitz on the former Poland-Germany border just last night.
Please, I've got the data drive.
Szybko! Check the contents, quick!
It's loading. What is Operation Steadfast Refuge?
I don't know. Let's move!
Okay, so starting off with the first part of this transcript, or this audio log. A satellite lands at a town called Gorlitz, which is situated on the former Poland and Germany border. Now, it's important to know that the soldiers at the start of this are American soldiers. Now, they're going to try and obtain this data drive from this landed satellite, and a couple of seconds later after obtaining it, they are ambushed by a team trying to also collect this data drive. So again, as you can see, do you see where the Hazard Zone part comes into it again? So yeah, they're also ambushed by a team that's trying to collect this data drive, but then they're ambushed by another team which are trying to also go for this particular data drive. Then hear a transcript towards the end of this bit of the audio section, and it goes into detail and it's being checked by the crew, and they find on the drive that it's mentioned something called Operation Steadfast Refuge. At this time, we don't know what Operation Steadfast Refuge actually is. Again, that's probably going to be something when the game does release, and that's something we're going to find out throughout playing Hazard Zone and throughout listening to these additional podcasts. But again, yeah, interesting thing there. The next part of this podcast goes into detail and mentions around the US and Russia, saying that they've essentially declared war on each other in an attempt to have world domination, trying to obtain these data drives. If one of these world governments do obtain these data drives and they have the relevant or correct details thereafter, it could turn this war into a very one-sided war. Again, I'm sure we'll learn a lot more around what these satellites have on them and what this data actually is when we play the game. Again, this is just pre-game stuff before it's even launched and before we know anything further about it. But again, it's interesting to take into account as well. I'm going to play the news flash that's in the background as well, and I want you guys to listen to this now, and then we can talk about it and piece it together after as well.
Bullets are flying in the former German city of Gorlitz today after a series of...
turned the Polish border town into another hazard
Another
zone.
city to fall victim to the growing Russian-American...
The U.S.-Russia war rages on tonight, ignited only days ago in the wake of the Battle of Doha. While the media has been reporting that the voices you've just heard belong to American and Russian soldiers, as you'll soon see, that might not be the whole story. I'm your host, Mitali Reed. This is the Reed Report.
So to summarize it very, very briefly, again, it goes into detail and says that the town, Gorlitz, that we mentioned earlier, is now turned into a hazard zone. And that was, of course, where the first instance of this satellite dropping into the map and this intel was there. And then, of course, it mentions at the end of it that the world thinks that the voices that are on the leaked transcript that we heard at the very start of the video were US and Russian forces. However, this may not be accurate, and another faction could have done this. Potentially the NOPATs? We'll have to wait and see. Alongside the Russians and the US battling it out and declaring war on each other and fighting to try and, I don't know, get these data drives and to try and be the most powerful government in the world, there are some NOPATs, such as, for example, Odds that we've seen in the Exodus trailer, who have found this war to be nothing to hide from, but a way to maybe take back what's theirs and to fight for their future. Some taking it a little bit further than others though. So the host of the podcast wanted to get some more details around this leaked tape. So she traveled to the town of Gorlitz and spoke with an ex-Russian soldier that goes by the name of Anton, who was interviewed on this podcast to understand if there was any Russian soldiers here to speak from their perspective, and if so, what was said by them. Now, in this part of the podcast is where we learn a little bit more around what's on these data drives and why the factions are after them so badly. So I'm going to let you listen to this transcript from them, and again, we'll talk about it after.
To unpack what exactly was going on in the leaked audio, I reached out to an expert on the ground.
It survived the Great War.
I'm outside Gorlitz, which is now under American occupation, to learn what happened firsthand. I've been put in touch with a former GRU agent, Russian intelligence, who I'll just refer to as Anton. So tell me, Anton, what is it you hear on that tape?
That is the American soldiers going for the capsule, for the drive.
Wait. So what is the capsule?
Low-orbit reconnaissance capsules. Whatever see is encoded to an internal hard drive and then shot to Earth.
Are you saying this crash was intentional?
Oh, very much so.
Why design capsules that have to be physically recovered?
In the digital world, the best-kept secret is analog. Ever since the blackout, it's the most secure option they have.
Of course, what Anton is referring to is the blackout of 2040.
In a shocking turn of events, the world's hopes of recovery were devastated today.
The authorities estimated more than 70% of orbiting satellites have malfunctioned.
The global blackout of communications and navigation systems,
including dozens of fatal plane crashes around major
Both
cities.
US and Russia are accusing the other of causing the incident.
The blackout was the biggest disaster of the last decade. Orbital reconnaissance is what kept Russia and the US from going to war with each other, because they could see what the other was doing, for the most part.
Okay, but now, what does this have to do with what happened in Gorlitz?
With the satellites gone, we couldn't eavesdrop anymore. For a critical period, everything would rely on human intelligence. Operatives, specialists, spies. We ultimately settled on a controversial solution, and America wasn't far behind. No PATs.
Anton explains that without satellite reconnaissance, both superpowers turned to NOPATs to beef up their intelligence capabilities.
Okay, so now you've heard it, let's summarize it. The start of the conversation. The satellites which crash in Hazard Zone are not random events. They are very, very intentional. These satellites are called low orbital reconnaissance capsules, and if the US, Russia, or the NOPATs get hold of these capsules, they can make this war very one-sided. The data on these drives is in an analog format. Since the blackout, everything has turned digital. Everything has gone completely digital, and in a digital world, as what Anton mentions, this is the best way to keep data as secretive as possible, and that's keeping it analog. This is is why someone has to physically go to remove the drive from these capsules, as it's encoded in this particular format, which will prevent anyone from hacking into things or essentially remote taking this data from the other side of the world. So you have to physically be there to remove the drive, and then you can basically download the data on that drive. Orbital reconnaissance is the reason why the US and Russia didn't go to war on each other before 2040. And now that these satellites are crashing down, it means that these two world governments can't keep tabs on each other, which is a big thing for these two. Obviously, they want to know exactly what each other are doing, exactly what each other are plotting, but when there's no satellites or anything to be able to do that, again, they're getting very weary of what's to come, and if any of the others are plotting anything against them. After this, for a critical period of time, the US and Russia would rely on human communication to try and find out if they were plotting anything against each other. So they would send in things like spies to the other location to act as Russian or American soldiers, and they would also try to eavesdrop on conversations and things like that to try and find out exactly what was going on at that time and to see if anyone was planning anything against them. Again, without having these satellites in the sky, they can't just digitally see across the world exactly what's going on just by a click of a button on a computer. Without these satellites, they've got to physically have someone fly over there and report back that way. However, eventually, after doing this, both countries realized that this was way more work than what it actually needed to be, and that it wasn't really working out the way they wanted to. And of course, this is where the NOPATs come into things. Again, the NOPATs are a third faction in this world, and they were formed of people that were non-patrioted, and due to obviously the world crumbling down and there being essentially the next Great Depression, loads of different states across the US were failing and having loads of problems, and essentially no one really cared about their country or anything along those lines anymore because they weren't providing the NOPATs or the civilians with any help. That's why they formed the NOPATs, again, to have their own faction, to stick together and to help each other out in their communities. Now, the US and Russia have turned to these NOPATs, or this faction called the NOPATs, to try and essentially ask for their help to go to these different locations and to work for the US or the Russian governments to try and obtain this information and feed it back to them. Now, yes, it's great for the US and Russia because they can now spy on each other with these satellites back in the sky with the help of the NOPATs. Yeah, it's great now they can see exactly what each other are doing, but they didn't take into account that now the NOPATs can see exactly what these two governments are doing now. Now, there's another part of the conversation I want to play to you guys again, so listen out to it, and again, we'll summarize at the end.
What the US and Russia didn't count on was that when they finally did get satellites back into the sky, those same NOPATs began to intercept every signal that they could get their hands on.
There are over 40 failed states and counting. Each one of them had their own MI6, their Mossad, their NSA.
Or NOPATs as they like to be called, are still shunning international aid.
Instead to remain autonomous and provide for themselves.
What do you think was on this capsule that's so dangerous?
No, it's not what's on it. It's who's after it.
America and Russia.
Well, there were never any Russian soldiers there. Those aren't Russian soldiers. They're Russian-speaking NOPATs.
How do you know?
Well, because they're saying stray dogs. Now, that's what NOPATs call each other in my part of the world.
Wait a second. The squad that attacked the Americans?
Yes.
And the squad at the end?
Yes, yes.
All NOPATs fighting each other?
Absolutely. You know, some of these drives are worth their weight in gold. The past few times these things have come down, it's like a NOPAT Christmas morning.
But aren't NOPATs generally on the same side, after the same things?
Well, this war is changing that. And fast.
Perhaps war has drawn new dividing lines within the NOPAT ranks. It makes sense. Intel is a universal commodity. Russia and the US's new capsules could be too tempting for those just trying to survive. Maybe the binds that kept them together are starting to fray.
So yeah, very interesting again, and going over it very briefly, it goes, this capsule, who's after it, Reed says to Anton. And Anton responds, there are no Russian soldiers on the tape. They are Russian-speaking NOPATs. The squad that attacked the Americans were NOPATs, but then the team that attacked those NOPATs were also NOPATs. The drives that these teams are after are extremely valuable, and they hold their weight in gold, some of them. Reed then mentions to Anton, aren't all the NOPATs on the same side because they're in one faction? This is what is changing that. The data on these data drives, the want and the need for world domination, or for the NOPATs to be the most powerful faction in the world. This is why, again, we're breaking off into different parts of the NOPATs. Again, a really good part of this, and an example, is the Exodus story. Irish is a part of the NOPATs, and so is Oz. Irish doesn't agree with Oz, but Oz wants to take over the world, and he wants the No-Pats to be the most powerful faction in the world. Those two do not agree with each other, and it's Irish's job to essentially stop Oz from taking over the world and, obtaining the data before him. So again, there's different parts of the No-Pats factions there. So No-Pats is an overall faction, but within the No-Pats, there are multiple different things and squads or factions within that faction. It's quite complicated. Of people and their different beliefs and things along those lines. So some of the No-Pats may just be there to, again, help their community. Some may just be there to fight for what's right and fight for their freedom and, fight for their rights. And the other, Oz's side, to be exact, are there to try and be the most powerful faction in the world and to essentially do whatever they need to do and do whatever needs to be done to become the most powerful faction in the world. And if that involves the death of No-Pats as well, alongside the US and Russia, then that's how it is. So again, loads of different perspectives, and it's really interesting to cover that as well. On to the next part of the podcast goes into some really interesting details as well, and a character that we are very familiar with called Kayvan Bashir, which is from the journey of the No-Pats, actually speaks on this podcast, which I was not expecting at all. I felt like this is a really interesting part that I want you guys to listen to this conversation as well. It's a back and forth, and again, we'll summarize it at the end.
To dig deeper into this idea, I knew there was only one person I could call.
Hello?
Hi, Kayvan.
Hi, hello.
The man I'm talking to is Kayvan Bashir, once a freelance journalist. Kayvan, I'm calling because I'm wondering if you can shed some light on something I just learned. Last night in Gorlitz, there was apparently...
I'm sorry. I cannot talk about Gorlitz.
I just want to know, is it possible that armed No-Pats are fighting each other over intel?
Is it possible? Absolutely, they are.
Don't you think the non-patrioted is a serious threat to world stability?
The non-patrioted are the symptom of that instability, not the cause.
Okay, but you are saying that they're fighting each other. How did this rift begin?
They never were unified. The mainstream media just labeled every refugee, every displaced person as a No-Pat. There's a lot of factions out there that agree on nothing more than staying alive.
What do the non-patrioted even do with this intel when they get it? Is this about money or making a statement?
What? No-Pat specialists are some 15-year-old kids looking to take down the man. These are skilled soldiers, spies. They understand the value of an asset when they see one.
What's an example of what the non-patrioted have been able to do with something like this?
Well, one briefcase was able to start this whole war.
How exactly did No-Pats start it?
Not the No-Pats. It was one man. Oz.
Amongst a handful of No-Pat thought leaders, one voice stands out from the herd.
Known only as Oz.
He speaks to the masses mostly through recorded messages and speeches.
Some have labeled him a terrorist, while others hail him as a
He
hero.
commands thousands of No-Pat task forces around the globe.
But we have learned the harsh lessons this new world has taught us. We survived. That is why they hate us. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what it has ever done for you.
If you listen to any of Oz's transmissions, one thing is clear. He thinks the world is a broken place that still needs to be smashed further to rebuild. But the idea that he would start a war, or could, of this scale, seems impossible. What could a refugee soldier use to lure these two superpowers into open war? The war began 8 days ago. That's what we're being told when Russian forces collided in Doha with US forces on a top-secret mission.
Right, but how did Russia know to be there at that exact moment? Oz was able to bait them with intel that he knew they wouldn't resist.
What was the intel?
I can't say.
In the Gorlitz transmission, there's mention of something called Operation Steadfast Refuge.
I'm not going to talk about that.
Ugh. Why did you agree to speak to me today?
Because there's people out there that have been seduced by Oz's rhetoric. The idea of No-Pats as a recognized force in the world, even a superpower in their own right, is a romantic idea to those suffering. But they need to understand the lengths he will go to achieve that end are horrific, and his own people are dispensable. This war isn't the end goal for Oz. It's just the beginning.
The beginning? The beginning of what? Kayvan? Kayvan! I haven't been able to reach him ever since.
So again, really interesting, and again, it goes into detail. If you had read the Journey of the Nopats or listened to my video around Journey of the Nopats, you'll understand exactly what happened to Kayvan at that point. So again, I'll leave that. I won't spoil anything. I want you to go back and check out the videos if you do want to know. But again, summarizing what happened here. The Nopats were never unified, Kayvan mentioned. There are Nopat factions which are solely formed to stay alive and form a community, others are to help civilians and fight for what's right, and the others are to, again, take over the world to be the most powerful faction on the planet, no matter the cost. Again, what we just mentioned before this clip was played. What did the Nopats do with this intel? Well, Kayvan mentioned that one of the briefcases essentially started this whole war, which is one from that Irish had to hand over to Oz. And again, I'll show it on the Exodus story trailer, on the Exodus story that we actually seen as well. Irish was instructed by Oz to go and obtain some intel from within London, and that's where they mentioned and found Pat. Pat obviously was trying to stop them from doing so. Irish took Pat back to the ship, and that's where Pat mentioned that if we give Oz this data drive, that essentially we're going to start World War III. And of course, when Oz found out that we were trying to resist from giving it to him, we drove into the storm. That's when, of course, Oz tried to do whatever it took to get this data drive. And of course, that's where the story ended off. So Oz, of course, got this data drive. It was sent over to him. And at the end, we found that the satellite that is in question, or the intel that's in question, was in Doha, Qatar. So that's where Irish and the team were going to next to try and, again, intercept this data and this data drive from Oz and the team and other Nopats, the US and Russia as well. That's where we are so far. It was also mentioned, which is really interesting as well, that it sounds as though this part of the story has already happened. So it looks as though that when the satellite fell out of the sky in Doha or Qatar, that the teams have already been to that location. So it goes on to mention and says that Oz wanted this data drive within Qatar, the satellite or the orbital reconnaissance that fell from the sky. He wanted this really bad because it was classified as an American weapon. And if anyone did go ahead and claim this, they would be one of the most powerful factions in existence at that time. So of course Oz wanted this. Oz wanted to take over the world. Oz wanted to be the first person to this. And what better way to do this was to play US and Russia and make sure that they're against each other, and to essentially make it as the Oz is doing them a favor. Earlier on in the video, we mentioned that the Nopats were used by the US and Russia as essentially that bridge to try and spy on each other and to give information from one to the other. Well, Oz used this to his advantage. Of course, Oz is the leader of the Nopats, so they're going to trust what he says. Oz tells the US and Russia that both of them are trying to go for this satellite, and if they obtain this data, this, again, they know the severity of this, and he explained it to them, and they essentially told them both to go there at the same time. Now, this means that when both of them get there, they're going to run into each other, they're going to kill each other, or a lot of them are going to die defending this satellite, which then means that the Nopats are going to come swooping in, take out the rest of the remaining people, and take the drive for themselves. This seems to be an ongoing trend for a lot of the satellites that are being taken or taken within the world of Battlefield and Hazard Zone. And again, it was described in this transcript or podcast that the American and the Russian governments are just puppets in this war, with Oz pulling the strings. Kayvan also mentions at the end of this too that this wasn't the end for Oz, and that this right here, this first satellite within Doha, was only the beginning. Again, if this one satellite contains all this information, who's to say that the other ones aren't going to contain better information? So again, really, really interesting stuff. Again, it goes into detail and it basically brings everything together as well. So it's really, really cool. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. Again, I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. Drop a like on the video if you have, it's much appreciated, and subscribe if you are brand new as well. We're going to try and do as many of these as possible when these podcasts do come out. And of course, when the game does release, it'll give us some more details on exactly what's going on in the world of Battlefield. And yeah, more details around that. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. Like I said, drop a like if you have, subscribe if you're brand new, ring the notification bell as well to be notified when a video does go live, especially when the game does finally release. There's going to be a lot of videos going out. So hope you have enjoyed. Have a good rest of your day. We'll see you all on the next one.